Hello, and welcome to what was week 7 of the Hive Pollinator, the mindful use of digital tools. I am recording this after the end of the Hive Pollinator and also without my wonderful collaborator who talked in depth about actually using generative AI to produce things. I'm only going to cover that a little bit, and we're going to try to keep this fairly brief. Okay. So on the agenda, we're going to talk about social engineering. It's a topic that was covered in cybersecurity and privacy. We're going to get into algorithms and mindfulness around using objects that are algorithm based. Then what is artificial intelligence? How did we arrive at where we are? I'll give you some areas to explore and then just a bit of how to get the most out of the experience if you do end up using a generative AI such as ChatGPT or uh, Gemini or Llama AI or uh, Microsoft's Copilot. Okay. So what is social engineering? It's a term that you might have encountered when learning about cybersecurity and hacking. It refers to the process of essentially manipulating people and on a very large scale. This form of manipulation has been an engine for colonization. And the way that it works through technology, it's a very useful and common vehicle for introducing social engineering into a population. The key is to create an information imbalance between the people who are introducing the technology and then the people who are expected to adopt the technology, use the technology, but not actually develop or produce the technology themselves. So someone comes in with a brand new technology and they present it like, hey, this is going to revolutionize the way that you do A, B, C, and D. Like, I see you over there tying knots in order to count, in order to enumerate things and keep tabs on numerical information. This is not only going to be able to count for you, but it's also going to be able to follow you around and tell you where to go. It's going to make it easier for you to communicate with people across long distances. It's going to help you keep time. Here's just this amazing technology that going to completely change your world, and it does things that you already are familiar with. So it's not going to be a huge leap to get from what you're currently doing to using this technology. The next stop after introducing a new technology is to encourage or coerce adoption of the technology. The key here is to not explain how it works or how to develop it, because if you give people the tools that they need in order to develop the technology themselves, they're not going to depend on you for developing the technology and for giving them the technology. So you must keep the elements of how the technology actually works from getting widely known or widely reproduced. It's fairly simple at this point with digital technology to not worry about people reproducing it because it's incredibly specific and technical as to how to create these things, and nobody's going to be able to take them apart physically and figure out how they work and then recreate them that way. So already you're creating a dependency by producing this technology, which is otherwise not reproducible by the average person, and distributing it throughout the population. When people come to rely on the technology, they pretty much just have to go to you to get the technology. They're no longer able to figure out on their own how to redo the things that they were doing. And the last step for social engineering, now that you've introduced a technology that creates an information imbalance, is to subvert the goals and interests of the population to be the goals and interests of the technology developers. And I love the way that Arabic folklore talks about this and has been talking about this for a very long time. Just picture having a genie, someone who pops into your life and is able to grant you wishes. And of course, this is a delightful thing. You get to have whatever you want. You get to do all these things that you previously were less able to do or were extremely challenging or you were unable to do at all. Now this genie comes in and is like, hey, I'm actually going to make your wishes come true. Just let me know what to do and I'll do it for you. And the thing about the genie is that whatever you ask of the genie or the Jinn uh, is interpreted by that entity and done in such a way that benefits ultimately the entity rather than the person who is asking for it. So in the short term, you might get your wish granted, you might get from point A to point B, things might be easier for you. But over the long term, you're sacrificing your ability to do things for yourself. You're also giving quite a lot more than you might necessarily even know you're giving to the company that created the technology in exchange for getting whatever output out of the technology. And I would also mention here that by putting a digital layer between you and whatever you are interacting with out in the world, other people, objects, your environment, not only is the technology able to collect information about you and how you interact with the world, but it's also able to tailor what the world appears like to you according to the needs of the technology company. So if it wants to convince you that the world exists in a particular way because that's beneficial for the technology producer, if it wants you to feel like technology is this magical thing that occurs in the cloud rather than a fully physical structure, it's able to do that by hiding all of those pieces from you and then just delivering this kind of seamless experience where you're interacting with the technology and it gives you what you want. So this brings us to being aware of algorithmic influence and how algorithms can creep into your life through the use of digital tools and then maneuver you in a way that works not necessarily for you, but works for the bottom line of the company that produces the algorithm. So I like to describe algorithms, essentially just things that follow rules to get you from input to output, as sort of being a recipe for, at this point, large scale manipulation. It's sort of like in a 80s or 90s rom-com where someone is stalking you, is following you around. Usually it's the guy who decides really wants to get the girl, decides that in order to get the girl has to be interested in all of the things that she is interested in, and takes on all of that information that he can, kind of in secret, follows her around, figures out what she likes, what she doesn't like, and makes himself as appealing as possible using that information without necessarily giving anything away to her. So this form of stalking where everything that you like and you dislike, everything that you interact with through the course of the day is collected and then used in order to tell you what you need to hear in order to get you to do something that you might not otherwise do. That's the goal of at least the monetization portion of these items. And for them, it's important, for the companies that make these technologies, it's important that they make money off of whatever it is. They're not necessarily making money off of the physical hardware. That's usually a one-time cost, but they might have you subscribe to a service, or if it's a free platform, you're essentially just toiling on their land, and whatever the products are of your labor, whatever content you put on there, whatever information you give, can then be repackaged and sold to someone else who is actually the customer. It's generally not you who is the customer of the product or service that you are using, unless you are giving them a lot more money. Um, Generally, the customer is whoever pays for the advertising. And even at that point, they're not necessarily the customer, because the bottom line for the company is to do what works best for the company. So they will also willingly negate the wishes of the client who is purchasing advertising space in order to get the most out of the technology that they've created. So what algorithms have been used for, just complex sets of rules that get from A to B, is putting a layer of technology between people and everything in their environment, including their geographic location, friends, family, loved ones, colleagues, goods and services, ideas and perspectives. Anything that you want access to, you can get through algorithmic mediation. And what the algorithm does for the company that created it is it collects all of the information about everything that you're doing. And then it could use that, package that up, get you to buy things, trigger certain emotion, get you to do things. The idea is that you are exchanging something for the pleasure of getting to use this algorithm. That something might be part of who you are, your time, your attention, your energy. Um, like you don't necessarily know what the trade is going to be until you've made that trade. So I would say be mindful when you're engaging with any sort of technology that you're not giving so much of yourself away that you can now be steered in particular directions and manipulated to do things that you would not otherwise do. So one of the things that technology does really well is it hides how it works. And we talked about at the beginning about social engineering, that information imbalance is part of the trick. So how did we actually arrive at the technologies that we currently have? Well, they've been a very long time in the making. Current digital tools have been in development for probably as long as humans have been around. And they started with the development of language as a way to create ideas in another's mind that exist in your mind. You're essentially exchanging information and hoping that whoever you exchange that information with is able to recreate it in a similar enough way that you can form a connection. The challenging thing about language, particularly as it pertains to digital technologies that are very much language based, is that the language that ended up being quite dominant and inserted itself into our computations is a language that is very noun heavy. It's a language that is used to describe things, to set boundaries around ideas and concepts, to make categories. English is a very noun and category heavy language. Very good at descriptors, very good at itemizing things, not necessarily good at describing the flow of energies through the world or nuance or spectrums of information where it's not absolutely clear where something falls. So that's the language basis of a lot of our programming languages and how we interface with machines. So they're already inclined to create categories and to have binaries, which brings us to another basis for computation, which is ones and zeros. At the physical level, within each of our machines, there are millions of little transistors. And those transistors are either passing an electrical current or they're not. And whether they are passing the current or not is represented as a 1 or a 0. And layered on top of that, and with the use of logic gates such as and, or, nor, you can create quite a bit of complexity. So you can create all the images that we see on the screens, language, audio, just any sort of information could ultimately be converted to a set of ones and zeros. But at bottom, that's what it is. So there's none of that fluidity, none of that messiness that comes with natural information out in the world. It all ends up being converted into either it's on or it's off. The other basis for machine learning algorithms and the generative AI that we have is statistics, specifically frequentist statistics. It's a way of understanding the world by counting the occurrences of events and trying to make predictions of future occurrences based on past occurrences. And one of the easiest examples to demonstrate if you want to do this for yourself and you have, say, I don't know, several weeks to roll a pair of dice a million times, you can roll the dice, roll two of them, and see how frequently you arrive at each possible number from 2 to 12 and find that on average, you're going to get a 7. And so if you're trying to make predictions about how any pair of dice is going to roll, you can form a curve, and then that thickest part of the curve is going to be your most likely outcome. And you could apply that on a much larger scale, not just to random events like dice rolling, but also to language, which actually follows patterns. And natural language processing, which is the basis of many of the models that we interact with, many of the AI models, is a way of determining what words co-occur together and the likelihood that the words that you are asking about, you're querying in your prompt, are related to these other words, and it uses statistical modeling to give you a response based on your query and based on just the likelihood of words co-occurring near each other in prompts that the model has been trained on. So it uses statistics in order to make predictions, which once again creates a layer of abstraction and removes quite a bit of the nuance from the natural world, which doesn't necessarily follow these really neat rules, but the rules need to govern the machine itself because it doesn't actually know what the world is. It doesn't exist out in the world. It just has rules to follow and data on which it can apply those rules. And the last component that goes into large language models and the things that we end up using, the digital tools that we interact with. It's called artificial intelligence, but artificial is an artificial distinction. Everything that exists on this planet is of this planet. It is natural. It is based in a natural resource. And our models are not different in that regard. They are pulled out of the ground, they are mined, they are refined, and the people who engage in this work are often made invisible to the people who are ultimately using the machines. But there's quite a lot of human labor involved in developing the components that go into these machines, and there's quite a bit of an ecological impact that comes with that. So all these things together, a lot of manual labor, language, stripping things down to a binary and making assumptions about them, like statistically go into making these models that seem to have intelligence, but it's just really guesswork and brute force and just being able to guess over and over and over and over and over again. So if you have enough time, anyone could become an artificial intelligence. So here are some areas that might be interesting to explore if you are interested in getting to know artificial intelligence as a physical construct and kind of what it is behind the scenes. You could look into the materials and resources that go into creating the servers, how much energy and water these models consume. It's actually a very water intensive process. That's one of the resources that isn't necessarily mentioned when we talk about expanding the use of these models. Yes, they take a lot of electricity, which comes often from coal and fossil fuels, but they also consume a lot of water to cool the servers. All of those transistors that are either on or off, passing electricity or not, generate a lot of heat and they need to be cooled down. And the way that is done is by evaporating water. So that water comes in and it changes state and it's no longer consumable by any other beings. So a lot of our water goes into these things and it doesn't come back out. Who controls the models and who benefits from their production? So you have really powerful tools that are really hard to make. Someone controls them and someone benefits from their existence. Some of those benefits might seem to accrue to the ultimate users of the models, but that's not really who they're for. So just kind of looking into who actually gets something out of these. The labor that goes into both producing and maintaining, there is specialized labor. So what sort of knowledge do you have to have in order to be able to create a machine learning algorithm, to program it, to understand what it does? And, how many people actually have that training, have that specialization? And then the more general knowledge that is used to tag all of the training data that is used by the AI. So AI actually relies on a lot of manual labor. Most of that labor is not, it's not particularly pleasant. You're essentially just looking at images and words and converting them into a form that the machine could interpret. But a lot of people end up with PTSD from doing such work because they end up with a lot of images that are really graphic or violent or just uncomfortable to witness. What training data goes into these models? So one of the bottlenecks for artificial intelligence models is that we've already trained on just about all of the data that anyone could access. How much of it is copyrighted? How much of it has been stolen without permission from whoever generated that data? Just figure out what actually goes into these models. Where does the information come from? Is it everything on the internet that is trying to tell you specific things that maybe you would prefer curated data for? What are existing use cases and applications? How have these things already shown up in the real world? Particularly, I would look at surveillance because that's a huge application. It's like, oh, instead of having people do facial recognition and try to figure out who's in or who's out of a club, you could have an algorithm do the same thing and you could scale it up and use it to surveil people at a scale that was not previously possible. What are the limitations? So computational physical limitations. At what point are we just training machines on artificial data that they've created? And then what are the rates of biases and hallucinations? There's plenty of books out there on biases in algorithms. You have race. The name. And then if you are ultimately choosing to use these models, just remember that you are putting stuff into it. And the more you put into it, the more customized, the more personalized the results are going to be, but you are giving something of yourself away in this exchange. And in most interactions on the internet, you're not necessarily going to know what you're giving away. But with artificial intelligence in particular, anything that you put on a platform that uses AI now belongs to the company that produces that AI. So any art form, any intellectual property, anything that you create and you upload to one of these platforms now also belongs to that company and can be used for whatever the company wants to use it for, which includes giving you more and more specific things that you're more likely to want to use. So proceed with caution. Don't give too much of yourself away. And when you are engaging in a conversation with one of these models, it will sound quite human. It's able to imitate human patterns really well because it's been trained on quite a lot. But ultimately, it exists in a server farm and has no concept of what the actual world is. And these companies that are producing these models are essentially in their kind of nascent stages where they're still like these giant robots who have quite a lot of impact on the world, but they're just walking around, starting fires, kicking rocks. They don't necessarily have the collective consciousness awareness to navigate the world in a way that doesn't also cause quite a bit of harm. So be wary that whatever application you are interacting with, whatever use case you are engaging, that you're not contributing to the harm being generated by these corporations. All right. That's it.